Hello everyone, happy Saturday and welcome along to our webinar today, all about teaching speaking. I know this is a topic that you all want to learn more about because, it's something so intrinsic to what we do as an English teacher. Just in case I haven't met you before, my name is Mairead. I'm based in the west of Ireland and I have been in the world of TEFL since 2003. And I've been with the TEFL Academy since 2015. So hopefully I will have lots of advice and important information to share with you all today. As ever, the first part of our webinar will be a presentation on the topic of teaching speaking, but in the second half of the webinar, it will be a questions and answers session. So you can ask me anything you've ever wanted to know about teaching speaking in the EFL classroom. Just so I can get some context on who's watching today, why don't you say hello in the chat box? Tell me where you are in the world, because I always love to see that. While you are popping your info into the chat box, let's get going. We have a lot to cover today. So I guess the first question that might come into your head when you think about teaching speaking is why? Okay, why do we need to teach speaking in the EFL classroom? Oh, so many reasons. Essentially, we need to prepare students for real life. And in the real life, there will be a lot of speaking involved. We teach speaking to practice newly learned language. Maybe it's lexical, vocabulary based, maybe it's grammatical, or maybe it's functional. Functional language is what we use for specific functions or purposes. For example, if we wanted to apologize for something, we might use phrases like, "I'm so sorry," or "I didn't mean to," or "Please forgive me for." So that is what we mean by functional languages. They are phrases we use in a certain context. And by teaching speaking in class, we give our students the chance to practice all of this new vocab, grammar, and functional language. Of course, we also want to allow students to express themselves. I imagine there are few things more boring in life than being lectured at for an hour at a time. So when we teach speaking, we give the students the chance to give their opinions, to personalize the topic, and to express their emotions. And aside from all of that, teaching speaking adds variety and fun. It is normally all students want to do, at least in my experience. Learning grammar rules and vocabulary, okay, sometimes it's necessary, but they really just want to speak. So, with that in mind, what is a speaking task? Well, a speaking task is one which has speaking as its sole objective. Makes sense, right? A speaking task has to be purposeful. An ideal speaking task has an outcome. It's not just sitting there chatting about your day, okay? It's chat, but with a purpose. And it has a clear context within the lesson. For example, if you've been learning lots of vocabulary about travel, the ideal way to practice that would be to give them a task that allows them to talk about travel. Okay, so you're keeping the topic of the speaking task consistent with what you've been teaching your students. So like the speaking logically fits in to the context of the class. Now, what is not considered a speaking task? Now, this may seem like a strange question, but a lot of times in class, our students are speaking, but not necessarily doing a speaking task. For example, if your students have just done a reading and they've answered 8 questions and now they are reading, or now they are saying the answers out loud. That is not a speaking task as such, because they are only reading aloud their answers. Okay. The same with gap fills. If they have completed 7 sentences on the first conditional and they are reading the answers aloud, that is not a speaking task. Okay. Indeed, if they are reading a text aloud from a book, okay, sure, they're speaking because they're reading the words out loud, but that is not a speaking task either. Because for all of these types of activities, speaking is a byproduct as opposed to the main event. Okay, so just because your students are reading aloud sentences from a book, that does not constitute a speaking task. Okay, so that's important. Even though you will hear your students say a lot, yeah, not everything is a speaking task. So you might be wondering, how do we run a speaking task in the classroom? Okay, how do we deliver it? Well, there are lots of things for you to bear in mind when planning a speaking task. I would say the first one is preparation is key. I would never walk into a classroom and say to my students, okay, talk about travel for 5 minutes. Okay? I would not do that. That is way too abrupt and it is lacking in any preparation. So please don't assume that your students can just spontaneously speak about something just like that, okay? Because chances are they can't. They need some help. They need perhaps some brainstorming, perhaps some time to think of ideas to write. Perhaps they would like some images to spark their imaginations on a topic, okay? Preparation is key. And if you don't prepare your students for the speaking task, chances are they will not make the most of it. Secondly, do ensure that your task is purposeful. Again, if I say to my students, talk about travel for 5 minutes, they might be thinking, okay, but why? Yeah, what exactly am I hoping to achieve here? So make sure your task has a purpose or an end goal. Instead, I might say, so person A, okay, you love beach holidays. You love the sun. You love the sand. Okay, person B, you are a cold weather person. You love the snow. You love the mountains. So talk together for 5 minutes and try to convince each other to go on your dream holiday. Okay, so person A, you need to convince person B to go to the beach. And person B, you need to convince person A to go to the snow. So there we go. They will be talking about travel, okay, but their task will have a purpose. They've got to convince each other to go on the holiday they want, okay? So it may seem like a very minor tweak, but actually it's super important that every task has an outcome or it has a purpose. Also, please ensure that your students have prompts and the language they need to complete it. So if your students don't know much vocabulary related to travel, then that's a problem, right? They're not going to be able to speak about it for too long. Or if your students aren't blessed with a great imagination and they can't think of any ideas, then, the conversation is not going to go very far. So as the teacher, it is your job to make sure that they have some language that they can use to talk about a topic and that they have some prompts. Maybe if it's a role play, they have some role cards giving information on their character. Or if it's a chat about general holiday destinations, maybe you can bring in 6 or 7 images of different types of holidays. Or maybe you can spend 2 minutes before the task starts brainstorming. Yeah, just bring your students up to the whiteboard and let them write down any words they know about travel. it's so important that you put in the preparation beforehand so that they have everything they need in order to do a task successfully. Finally, you need to give clear instructions, because if students are not 100% sure on what they need to do, they will not be able to do it, right? They'll spend their time thinking, am I doing the right thing? What do I need to do next? Etc. So make sure you give super clear instructions, and as always, check that students have understood. Okay. So once you have delivered your questions, or once you have delivered your instructions, you might say, okay, Mary, what do you need to do first? Yeah. And Alex, what do you need to do next? Okay. And Maria, how long do you have to do the task? Okay. So you want to give your instructions and then ask the students questions to make sure that they know exactly what they need to do before they start. Okay. And if you can do those things, okay, prepare, make sure your task has purpose, give your students prompts and the language they need to complete it in advance. And if you can give clear instructions and check that students know what they have to do, you have a great chance of delivering a successful speaking task. Some more points for you to consider regarding speaking tasks. Please do give students processing time. Now, you might be wondering what I mean by this. Processing time is essentially thinking time. I know if somebody walked up to me right now and said, okay, talk about the environment for 2 minutes, go. My brain would go into like freeze mode, like, hang on, what? What am I going to say? What is this all about? Okay. And for your students, it's the same when you ask them to speak about something. We all need some thinking time, some processing time. Maybe it's 30 seconds, maybe it's a minute, but we just need to take some time to get our head around the task and to start generating ideas. Processing time will typically be silent, okay? So you might say to your students, in a moment, I'm going to ask you to talk about your favorite travel destination. Okay? But first, you have 30 seconds to think of some ideas. And then you are quiet and you allow 30 seconds of silence. You allow the students some thinking time to get their brains and their mouths in gear for the task. It's really important to give processing time. It can be super stressful for students if you don't, because they constantly have that feeling of being put on the spot and being pressured. Okay. Whereas if you give processing time, it smooths the transition into the task. Also, you must be super mindful of allocating enough time. You know, a task might be 5 minutes long, okay? It might be 10, whatever. It depends on the content of the task, okay? But you've got to give enough. If you say to your students, I want you to speak about your top 3 reasons for thinking that travel is the best thing we can do with our time and our money. Okay, so think of your top 3 reasons why travel is the best thing to do with your time and money. If we then say you have 1 minute, well, that's no good. I mean, 1 minute is not enough time. Okay, that will just lead to students blurting out any old thing and they won't have time to really develop their answers. Okay, so always give them enough time. What enough time is depends on how intricate the task is, right? But always give them enough. If I'm not sure how long a speaking task is, I will always estimate more than I think it will be, because it's much easier to cut time short than to then try to add time on. Okay, if that makes sense. So always err on the side of caution. You can always stop them like 2 or 3 minutes early if the task finishes. Okay. The real problem is when we give them a very short time to do something that is not realistic. Okay. When it comes to speaking tasks, try to monitor carefully. So you may already be aware of the term monitoring. This is when we walk around and we listen to our students and we make sure that they are doing what they need to do. During a speaking class, we want to monitor carefully, but we do not want to interfere, because as soon as we start interjecting with our opinions and what we think, that cuts their momentum entirely. Okay, so when you monitor, just try your best not to get involved unless they explicitly ask you something. Maybe they ask you for a word or what such a thing means, in which case help them, but then get out of there again, because they are not going to talk to each other freely as long as you are also trying to insert yourself in the conversation. Okay, so for speaking tasks, try to be as hands-off as you can. Do not interfere. There is always a degree of reading the room on this, I think. If you feel like a task is starting to fizzle out and lose momentum, okay, don't be afraid to just end it. Okay, like if you look at your watch and say, okay, well, I had 5 more minutes planned for this task, but it sounds like they have nothing else to say, cut it short. You can do something else with that additional 5 minutes, but don't let the task run on and on until they're all just sitting there awkwardly in silence looking at each other. Okay, because that really kills the enjoyment of a speaking task. So, read the room. And if a task dies a natural death, end it and move on. At the end of the task, like when students have spoken to their group or spoken to their partner, make sure at the end you then bring everybody back together and you give them a chance to give feedback. Okay, it's always nice to end back as a whole group again. You don't have to ask every student for feedback because that would take way too long, but you can pull out like 1 or 2 people who you heard say interesting things. Like you might say, Fred, you had an interesting story about an airport. Would you like to share it with the group? Okay. And then Fred can tell his story, and that, then wraps up the class nicely, or it wraps up the stage nicely. Or if you don't want to get too specific, you might say, Anna, can you tell me something you learned about your partner in the task? Okay, and then Anna can tell the class something she discovered about her partner's attitude towards travel or whatever. It doesn't matter how you get feedback, but it just brings the task to a really nice conclusion. Again, you don't have to hear from everyone. You won't have enough time. But yeah, just pick out 1 or 2 people to end the task. Now, I've already talked a little bit about pairs or groups. So that leads me on nicely to the topic of interaction. How you set up your class and how you ask them to interact is key to the success of a speaking task. I would always keep it at the forefront of my mind that pairs and small groups maximize student talking time. Okay. If you want to give your students the maximum time to speak, put them in pairs, because then everybody is talking, all the pairs are talking at the same time. They all get the full duration of the task to practice their speaking. I often see, especially new teachers, set up speaking tasks as whole class discussions. Okay, but this is far from ideal when it comes to speaking tasks because it means that only 1 student is talking at a time. Imagine you have 8 students in the class and you are going around one by one getting long answers from each student. That means that at any one time, 1 student is talking, The other 7 are just sitting there, okay? Probably just waiting for their turn to speak, and then they will be silent again, okay? So while whole class can work really nicely for short feedback sessions, as a main speaking task, I would never choose a whole class discussion, okay? It would be pairs and small groups all the way, because this gives everyone maximum opportunity to speak. While your pairs and small groups are talking, you will be monitoring, okay? You'll be walking around, listening in, but not interfering. A really important thing for you to do while monitoring is to watch out for dominating students. In the EFL classroom, as in life, there are all sorts of personalities out there, right? Some students are naturally much quieter, others are naturally more talkative. But if you notice that one student is really dominating a conversation and their partner can't get a word in edgeways, you need to deal with that situation. So in that case, I might interfere. I might say, oh, that's a really interesting point, Sarah. Why don't we hear from Mary? Mary, what do you think? Okay. And then when you are happy that Mary is getting her chance to speak, then you can move on again and continue monitoring. But yeah, these dominating students, we have got to step in and make sure that their partner is getting a fair share. A lot of times with speaking tasks, I will put, like, if I have 2 dominating students in a class, I will try to put them together, and basically they can just fight it out to speak. I will never put a dominating student with a very shy, quiet one, because guaranteed the shy, quiet one won't have a chance. So always be on the lookout for, conflicting personalities in a speaking class. Make sure that both parties are getting their chance to be heard. A really nice thing you can do, like if you notice a dominating student, or just if you notice the task kind of waning a little bit and students are running out of things to say, just ask students to switch partners, okay? So you might say, okay, everybody, turn to the person on your other side. Okay, give everyone a chance to turn around to the person on their other side and say, okay, let's continue the task. Or if you want, let's start the task again. Switching partners will always buy you some time. It will always re-inject some energy into a task. And, it's nice for the students to talk to someone different. Okay, even if they end up repeating some of their ideas, that repetition is good for consolidation. So yeah, switching partners is one of my favorite go-to moves when it comes to maintaining the energy of a speaking task. Now, when it comes to types of speaking task, well, the options are many and varied. I guess the most typical one is just a discussion, okay, where you give students a set of questions and you say, okay, in pairs or in small groups, I want you to look at each question and answer it, okay? I want you to give nice, long answers, okay? Give your opinion and why you think that, okay? Give reasons, etc. Okay, we want to encourage them to give well-rounded answers, not just one word, yes, no type answers. Okay, so discussions always work well. Interviews are also really nice. So if you have a pair, for example, you might say, student A, you are going to interview person B about their thoughts on travel. Okay, here are some questions to help you. Person B, you are going to interview person A. You have some different questions to ask them about their thoughts on travel. Okay, let's begin. So, an interview, it's essentially a discussion, but it's a little more personalized to the student's own opinions on whatever topic it is. You can also do a lot of really fun role plays. Okay, I gave an example earlier on, like student A, you love the sunshine and the beach. Okay, person B, you love the snow and the mountains. Okay, you need to talk together and try to convince the other person to come on your favorite type of holiday. So essentially, we're setting up an imaginary situation and often having the students pretend to be other people or to pretend to have other opinions. And then they just get to speak about things that are outside their own immediate experience. Role plays are super fun. I find, especially for shyer students who may find it difficult to talk about themselves, in a role play, because they're pretending to be someone different, it can really give them a chance to express themselves in a way that they probably normally would not. Okay. Another super fun activity, I am crazy about this activity, is ranking. So I might write the name of 10 countries on the board, okay, on the whiteboard, and number them 1 to 10. Then I would say to my students, I want you to look at this list of countries and in pairs, decide what would be your top 3 places to visit. Okay. So then it turns into like a discussion task, but with a purpose. They're talking about the pros and cons of each country with the purpose or with the aim of finding their top 3. And they've got to justify their reasons. So ranking is super, super fun. You can do it on any topic. You could do it on sports, on food, on hobbies, on cities, on jobs, anything. Just give them a list and ask them to choose their top 3 or bottom 3. Or you could say, put them in order where 1 is your favorite and 10 is your least favorite. Yeah. But the key thing is that they're having to negotiate and they're having to justify their opinions. And it has an immediate purpose inbuilt. So yeah, there is a lot to love about a ranking task. Debates are another really nice one. And, it doesn't need to be a full-on debate with teams and a moderator. Okay, it could just be an informal one. There's a really fun type of debate you can do easily and quickly. It's called a walking debate. So you would bring your students up to the board, up to the whiteboard or the interactive board, whatever you've got. On one side of the board, you write, for example, cats. And on the other side of the board, you write dogs. And you say to your students, so we're going to have a debate about the best pet to have. Is it cats or dogs? If you think it's cats, stand on cat's side. If you think it's dogs, stand on dog side. Okay? So everybody puts themselves on the side they want. And then they have got to essentially convince the other side to join their side. Okay? Or you can do a line in the middle, which is the undecided line. And, if somebody doesn't really know, they can stand in the middle. And again, the 2 sides have got to try and persuade them over. So essentially, you're trying to make your classmates walk from their side to your side by convincing them. Now, it doesn't always work. Generally, once someone has chosen a side, they stay there. But that's okay. The important thing is all that lovely language they use to try to convince the other side to join them. It doesn't matter if anyone actually switches sides. That's not the main thing. The joy of this walking debate comes from the effort to persuade and to convince. It's a lot of fun. Of course, you can do a full-on debate if you want, like have your 2 teams, have your moderator, give the teams time to prepare arguments, either for or against a certain topic. You can absolutely do that. That can result in amazing classes. But yeah, debates don't always need to be full-on serious, debates. All right. Other types of speaking tasks might include problem solving. So you can never go wrong with this, like present some sort of dilemma or some sort of problem and let the students try to come up with solutions in pairs and groups. This is a really good one. You can also do picture and photo description. This works especially well for lower level classes, okay? As long as they know some words related to what's in the picture or photo, yeah, you can set them off and just say, okay, everybody, what can you see? Tell each other. In 3 minutes, we're going to turn over the photos and you're going to try to remember and tell me what you saw. That's just to build in some purpose, right? You're turning it into a fun memory game. You can do information gaps where, for example, person A knows nothing about Canada, but person B does, okay? And person B knows nothing about Japan, but person A does. So they kind of need each other to find out information about something else. Again, this sets up a natural purpose to the task, okay? And it can be a lot of fun, like it results in a lot of genuine communication. A speaking task can involve telling a story or an anecdote. Okay, what's the funniest thing that ever happened to you? What's the most embarrassing? Okay, what's the nicest thing that's ever happened to you? What's the best food you've ever tried? These are a lot of fun too, because they allow the students to use their own experiences to tell a story or an anecdote to their pair or to their partner or group. And if you want, you can even get them to give presentations. Depending on how organized you want them to be, it can be with or without slides. But presentations are really good for giving students the chance to organize information and to speak, to give extended speech about a topic. Remember, the presentation doesn't need to be in front of the whole class. Okay, like one pair could present to another pair, or student A could present to student B. It doesn't always need to be this big stand up in front of the class activity, because some students can find that pretty intimidating. It can be, of course, but it doesn't have to be. So let's finish up by talking about some potential problems that may arise in a speaking task, and we will then look at some potential solutions happily. So potential problems could be an uneven number of students. Okay, a group of 3 has quite a different dynamic to a group of 2, and it can be a little bit harder to manage. Another potential problem could be that the dominant student won't let the others speak. It could be that students don't know what to say. It could be that your task fizzles out early and loses momentum. It could be that students constantly ask for correction during fluency tasks. So they're never really speaking at length because they're always stopping to ask you questions. Well, what can we do about these things? Luckily, there are pretty straightforward solutions. In terms of the uneven number of students, well, you're going to have to make tasks adaptable for groups of 3. This is something you will do in the planning stage. So if, for example, you're doing a role play that needs 2 people, like student A and student B, you're going to have to make one set of cards that also include a third person, student C. So that if you do have a group of 3, you're already prepared and you say, okay, you're going to use these cards, A, B, and C. So this is always something to consider when you're planning your lesson. Always have something for a group of 3, just in case. In terms of the dominant student, well, again, in the planning stage, you're going to try to allocate your pairs carefully. As I said, I will always put the 2 dominant ones together and let them fight it out for speaking time. Okay, they are if they are strong characters, they are well able to, to fight for their chance to speak. And then everybody else can, interact with someone on their equal footing. let's see, what was our third problem? Oh yeah, students don't know what to say. Well, here again, it's all in the preparation. Make sure you give students processing time. Again, give them time to think before the task starts, and give them lots of prompts, lots of words to use. Maybe give them some images to spark their imagination. Brainstorm some ideas in advance. Okay, so before they start the task, they already have ideas to use. If your task fizzles out early, as we said, you can switch partners or you can feed in new ideas. If you try once to resuscitate it, but it dies out again, just, move on. Bring it to an end and do something different. If your student keeps stopping to ask you questions or asking for corrections, remind them that you want them to practice speaking fluency now, so you need to hear them speak for an extended time. Tell them that you can't assess their speaking ability if they're not speaking, okay? And you can always remind them that you will do error correction afterwards, okay? Tell them that you'll write down any mistakes you hear, and when the speaking part of the task is finished, you will correct them, maybe on the whiteboard with the whole class. So while there are some potential problems, luckily there are lots of convincing potential solutions. You'll probably see that preparation really is key here, because we can preempt a lot of the typical problems in the planning stage. All right, so wow, that was a lot of speaking. Talk about a speaking task. As I promised, it is now time for a questions and answers session. We have lots of time left. We have 20 minutes. So if you have any questions about teaching speaking, or if you'd like me to clarify anything that I've said, now is your chance. Please put your questions in the chat box. And in order to give you some processing time, I am going to see the comments and see where everybody is, because it always brings me joy. So, hello, Alina. We have Sarah in the Netherlands. Oh, how fabulous. We have Ella in Germany. Hello. We have Crystal in South Africa. Julena in London. Oh, just across the water, not so far away. We have Ben in France. Oh, how wonderful. We have Frank in South Africa. Kamatso in South Africa too, and Sharifa in Cape Town. Oh, love to see all the representation of South Africa. I've been watching the Athletics World Championships for the last week, and I always support the South African athletes. I love them. Akani Simbine is like my favorite person on earth. So yay, South Africa. We have Daniel in Kansas City. Puerto Vallarta. Oh, nice. What a combo. The cold and the heat. We have Aisel in Zimbabwe. You are welcome. We have Moses in Brazil, Palesa in South Africa, Lydia in Canada, from New York and Lima. Oh, I'm loving this. I'm loving this mixture. So thank you all so much for sticking with me. Such an amazing representation from all over the world. So Sarah, you are in with our first question. What's the best way to do error correction kindly? So great question, Sarah. I would say always correct your students' errors like you would want someone to correct yours. So put yourself in their shoes. I know when I correct my students, I try to never jump in with, no, that's wrong. Okay. I will never say that. Okay. I will never say that to my students, because I know it's a horrible feeling being told, no, it's wrong. Okay. So I will start with, firstly, like acknowledging what they've done well. So I could say, Sarah, I loved your story about getting trapped in the airport. It must have been scary, but you made it into a fun experience. You said something. you said, I traveled at the airport. But we wouldn't say at. What could we say instead? I traveled the airport. Okay, so that is a way I might approach an error like that. I'll start with the positive, acknowledge the effort, acknowledge, the fact that they told a story, which is super impressive, and then just take them back to the error. I will tell them usually the wrong version. So you said I traveled at the airport, but let's use a different word. I travel the airport. So again, I'm not jumping in and telling them the right answer. I'm giving them the chance to self-correct. And, if the student doesn't know the answer, maybe someone else in the class does. Okay. So yeah, always, do it kindly, do it tactfully, try to lead with a positive, and then give them the opportunity to self-correct. Something I really like to do, Sarah, is whole class feedback. So if during a speaking task I hear a mistake, I just write it down in my notebook. So maybe at the end I have maybe 6 or 7 errors that I've heard from around the class. Then when the task is finished, I will write something, or I will write all of the incorrect things on the board and say, these are some errors I heard as I walked around the room, not naming any names. Okay, we never name names. It is totally anonymous. Now, work in pairs and see if you can correct these 6 mistakes. Okay, so yeah, there are just some approaches for you. But yeah, always lead with kindness and try to avoid the no, that's wrong, because nobody likes that. All right. Crystal, hello. How do you assist a student if you don't understand their native language? Oh, Crystal, isn't that just the joy of teaching? You will very often be teaching students whose first language you do not master. And while it can be a little difficult when there's a communication breakdown, it's actually much better in the long run, because it means that both you and the student are forced to find ways to communicate. And that's what happens in real life, right? Sometimes we just have to get our point across. We have no other option. So, you'll be doing lots of body language, lots of gestures, maybe draw a picture or show them a picture of something if it's a tangible object. Maybe you'll be giving synonyms. You say, oh, do you mean happy? Okay. Or, you'll be forced to find ways to communicate. And that's just the joy of teaching. That's the job. Okay. I know when I went to Spain, I already spoke Spanish. And honestly, in the beginning, I thought that was a huge advantage, because I knew the mistakes they would make and I knew why they were making them. But actually it turned into a bit of a disadvantage, because the students knew I understood, so they didn't have to work as hard anymore. They might say, oh, teacher, how do you say embarazada in English? And I would just tell them. But, that's just too easy. They're not having to work for it anymore. So eventually I said to my class, it was teenagers, I just said, oh, guys, I've forgotten how to speak Spanish. I'm sorry, I can't do it anymore. Oh, well, only English. And, they weren't overly thrilled about that. But in the long run, it was much, much better that I didn't share, or I didn't use Spanish with them, because it made everybody work harder, okay, to be understood. Apologies for that. The plug came out of the wall and I just had to plug it back in, or my laptop would die. So yeah, Crystal, don't worry about it. You will find a way to make yourself understood and to understand. All right. Lydia, how do you bridge the gap between correct and confirming grammatically correct answers with acknowledging colloquial acceptable answers these days? Oh, Lydia, great question. This is not just in the EFL classroom, this is in real life. There's a lot happening in the English language these days. And I can't say that I'm on board with all the trends, but look, it is what it is, to coin a popular phrase. So I would obviously try to tell students the correct way, okay, to say something, or like I will acknowledge a grammatically correct answer. But if there's an alternative, I will say, okay, so that would be the grammatically correct answer. Yeah. But you might also hear people say whatever the colloquial alternative is. So I would always lead by saying, okay, this is the correct, grammatically correct answer, but you might also hear whatever. Okay. English is constantly evolving. All right. Nice question, Lydia. Thank you. So Daniel, hello. What to do if during a small group speaking task you hear students reverting to their first language when chatting with each other or using their first language to translate for each other? Oh, Daniel, yeah, I'm getting flashbacks to my teaching in Spain days. I guess, Daniel, the first thing to do is to, if they're just translating, say, 1 or 2 words here and there, like isolated vocabulary words, I'm not too bothered as long as they are doing most of the task in English. However, if I see that a pair has just completely abandoned the task and they've gone off speaking Spanish, I'm just using Spanish as an example here, I will go over to them and say, hey, what's happening? I don't hear much English. Is there a problem with the task? And they will probably say, no. They'll say, okay, so, why don't you switch back to English and do the task? Okay. And I will just stand there and smile and, stare at them until they get back to English and do the task. Okay. So I will definitely let them know that I'm onto them and I hear them and I know what they're doing, but that I expect them to get back to the task. Okay. If they then revert to Spanish again, okay, I'll go back again. I say, oh, do you understand what you need to do? Yeah, you do? Oh, good. So Daniel, why don't you tell me something you could say in English about the task? Okay, and I'll stand there while Daniel gives me an answer, and then I'll turn to their partner and I'll say, and what about you? What do you think? Tell me something you'd say about this question. And say, okay, so keep speaking in English, please. And I'll move away again. And if I need to go back to them for a third time, I will say, okay, guys, this doesn't appear to be working. Why don't you go sit back in your seat? You go sit back in your seat. Okay, take out your book and read. And when we're finished, when everybody is finished, we'll do something else. So yeah, I do like a 3 strikes approach. They get like 1 warning, then a second warning, and then the third time I have to correct them on it. I'll just put an end to that group, send them off in different directions, and make them wait until everyone else is ready. Generally, I find that with a little bit of a warning, even though it's done nicely, like in a very non-threatening, natural way, yeah, very often a warning is all they need to kick back into gear. So yeah, that is my approach. And if the whole class are doing it, I will say, okay, everybody, let's stop. This isn't working. Come sit back to your seats and we're going to do some silent reading activity, or we're going to, learn new vocabulary on the board. Okay, so I will definitely, if the whole class are speaking Spanish, I will cut out the fun and we'll just sit down and do a quiet task that doesn't need any speaking. And very soon they will get the idea that it's more fun to speak in English than to sit and read silently in English, because they were speaking Spanish in the speaking task. So yeah. Oh, that was a long answer. I hope that made some sense. Let me know, Daniel, if that helps. And Let me see. Alex, hello. How do you distinguish oral reading fluency from speaking fluency? Alex, I am not sure I understand this question. Oral reading fluency. Do you mean reading aloud? Like reading a text aloud? So reading a text aloud, I mean, it is speaking, but it's not really fluency, is it? Because they're just reading words from a page. Whereas in speaking fluency, they're generating the ideas themselves. They're planning the grammar, vocabulary, and functions themselves. Speaking fluency is a lot more, it requires a lot more brain power than reading aloud. I hope I understood your question. If I didn't, please feel free to tell me in the chat box. Okay, so hello Irina from Czech Republic. What a beautiful country. And Ernest, hello. And Daniel, I am glad that was a useful answer. Yeah, good. I'm glad. Hopefully you can use some of those tips. Alex, reading aloud, yes, because you were talking about how it's not technically a speaking skill. Yeah, exactly. Reading off a page is just regurgitating. Okay. I mean, it is a skill. I mean, I'm always in awe of, say, newsreaders who can read from an auto cue. Like, I am so in awe of those people. But it is definitely a skill, but it's not a speaking fluency skill because they're not generating their own ideas or their own language. So yeah, good question. Have you ever seen the film Anchorman, where they're like changing words on the auto cue? Oh, it kills me. It's just the funniest thing I've ever seen. Oh, okay. Mary Magdalene from UAE. Oh, amazing. Thank you for joining us. I hope you will pick up some interesting tips on teaching speaking. For those of you who may have joined a little later and perhaps you missed the beginning, not to worry at all, because this webinar will be posted on our YouTube channel within the next couple of days. Okay, so today is Saturday, right? Usually by Monday, the webinars are on the YouTube channel. And, just in case you are new with us here in the TEFL Academy, please be aware that all of our previous webinars going back years and years are all available on the TEFL Academy YouTube channel. Okay, so everything is there for you to go back and rewatch. And if you want to hear more, or if you want to hear us talking some more about the world of TEFL, we also have a podcast, okay, a TEFL Academy podcast, where one of my colleagues and I discuss a different aspect of teaching every week. So if you would be interested in listening to our podcast, it's called TEFL Unlocked, and you will find us on Spotify, on Apple iTunes. If you log onto your course, there should be a link on your dashboard taking you to all of our episodes of the podcast. I think we have like 55 or 60 episodes by now. So, lots for you to listen to on your daily commute or as you do the housework. That is where I listen to all my podcasts when I'm trying to keep my house clean. It's a constant battle. All right. So let me check. Do we have any other questions? I know we have 5 minutes left. So if anything occurs to you, please pop it in the chat box. It would be good to use all of our time. Okay. Okay. Well, I think we're out of questions, but that's okay because the ones you asked were really amazing, very insightful. So you are all definitely thinking along the right lines. So hello, Andrew in South Africa. Welcome. So let's call it a day then. For me, it is 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay. I can see it's starting to get dark already because we're heading into autumn. By 8 o'clock, it will be pitch black. So yeah, I guess I am going to go and listen to some podcasts while I try to clean my house. And I wish you all a wonderful rest of weekend. Thank you so much for coming along. Of course, we will be here same time, same place next week with another fun topic. So yeah, thank you all so much for coming, and I hope to see you again soon. All right, everyone. Bye-bye.